Welcome to Berkshire Now, where we explore news and views from around the Berkshires. This episode, we return once again to Park Square in Pittsfield on the 4th of July. A number of students decided to take turns reading from Frederick Douglass's essay entitled The Meaning of the 4th of July for the Negro, given on the 5th of July, 1852.
We give recognition today first to our indigenous ancestors, whose ground we stand on presently. Independence Day was established in 1776. The Bill of Rights in 1791. Emancipation Day in 1862. The 13th Amendment ending slavery was December 1865. And for some in Galveston, Texas, that freedom did not come until June 19th of that same year. We come today not to celebrate the 4th of July. We come to celebrate Frederick Douglass by reading from his essay, The Meaning of the 4th of July for the Negro, given on July 5th, 1852. 76 years after Independence Day was established, 13 years after the Bill of Rights, and 13 years before the 13th Amendment. I will now invite Shirley Edgerton to the mic so that she can introduce our amazing speakers who are going to read today. Thank you.
Yes. Good afternoon. We appreciate all of you being here to witness and to share in this momentous occasion. First of all, I would like to thank Mass Humanities, PCTV, and the City of Pittsfield for helping us in coordinating and organizing what we are doing here today. And then I would like to introduce these tremendous young people that are standing behind me, whose voices will be uplifted and they will resound the words of Frederick Douglass. So first, we have Sodia Quetty Goodson. Then the second reader is Madison Powell. Third reader is Jackson Powell. Our fourth reader is Spencer Mathis. Our fifth reader is Olivia Ndu. Did I get it right? I still didn't get it right. It help me out.
Olivia Enda.
Okay. Standing next to Olivia is her brother, Emmanuel Enda. Okay. And we have next to Emmanuel, Amin Perry. And last but not least, Zoe Ruth. No? Okay, help me out, Zoe. Oh, Zoe. Zoe Ruth. All right, good.
The meaning of the 4th of July for the Negro. Frederick Douglass, July 5th, 1852. Mr. President, friends, fellow citizens, the task before me is one which requires much previous thought and study for its proper performance. The papers and play cards say that I am to deliver a 4th of July oration. This certainly sounds large and out of the common way, for it is true that I have often had the privilege to speak in this beautiful hall and to address many who now honor me with their presence. The fact is, ladies and gentlemen, The distance between this platform and the slave plantation from which I escaped is considerable, and the difficulties to be overcome and getting from the latter to the former are by no means slight. That I am here today is, to me, a matter of astonishment as well as of gratitude. This, for the purpose of this celebration, is the 4th of July. It is the birthday of your national independence and of your political freedom. This, to you, is what the Passover was to the emancipated people of God. It carries your minds back to the day and to the act of your great deliverance. This celebration also marks the beginning of another year of your national life and reminds you that the Republic of America is now 76 years old. I am glad, fellow citizens, that your nation is so young. You are, even now, only in the beginning of your national career, still lingering in the period of childhood. I repeat, I am glad this is so. There is hope in the thought, and hope is much needed under the dark clouds which lower above the horizon. Fellow citizens, the simple story is that 76 years ago, the people of this country were British subjects. The style and title of your sovereign people, in which you now glory, was not then born. You were under the British crown. Your fathers esteemed the English government as the home government, England as the fatherland, although a considerable distance from your home, imposed in the exercise of its parental prerogatives upon its colonial children such restraints, burdens, and limitations as, in its mature judgment, it deemed wise, right, and proper. But your fathers, who had not adopted the idea of the infallibility of government and the absolute characters of its acts, presumed to differ from the home government in respect to the wisdom and the justice of some of those burdens and restraints. They went so far as to pronounce the measures of government unjust, unreasonable, and oppressive, and altogether such as ought not to be quietly submitted to. I scarcely need say, fellow citizens, that my opinions of those measures fully accords with that of your fathers. Feeling themselves harshly and unjustly treated by the home government, your fathers, like men of honesty and men of spirit, earnestly sought redress. They petitioned and remonstrated. They did so in a decorous, respectful, and loyal manner. This, however, did not answer the purpose. They saw themselves treated with sovereign indifference, coldness, and scorn. Oppression makes a wise man mad. Your fathers became restive under this treatment. They felt themselves the victims of grievous wrongs, wholly incurable in their colonial capacity. With brave men, there is always a remedy for oppression. Just here, the idea of a total separation of the colonies from the crown was born. It was a startling idea, much more so than we, at this distance of time, regard it. The timid and the prudent of that day were, of course, shocked and alarmed by it. Their opposition to the then dangerous thought was earnest and powerful, but amid all their terror and affrighted vociferations against it, the alarming and revolutionary idea moved on, and the country with it.
On the 2nd of July, 1776, the old Continental Congress, to the dismay of the lovers of ease and the worshippers of property, clothed that dreadful idea with all of the authority of national sanction. They did so in the form of a resolution. We seldom hit upon resolutions drawn up in our day whose transparency is at all equal it. Resolved that these united colonies are, and of right, ought to be free and independent states, that they are all absolved from the allegiance to the British crown. Citizens, your fathers made good that resolution. They succeeded, and today you reap the fruits of their success. The freedom gained is yours, and you, therefore, may properly celebrate this anniversary. The 4th of July is the first great fact in your nation's history, the very ring bolt in the chain of your yet undeveloped destiny. Fellow citizens, I am not wanting in the respect for the fathers of this republic. The signers of the Declaration of Independence were brave men. I cannot contemplate their great deeds with less than admiration. They were statesmen, patriots, and heroes, and for the good they did and the principles that they contended for, I will unite with you to honor their memory.
They love their country better than their own private interests, and will concede that it is a rare virtue that ought to command respect. He who will intelligently lay down his life for his country is a man whom is not human nature to despise. Your fathers staked their lives, their fortunes, and their sacred honor on the cause of their country. They were peacemen, but they preferred revolution to peaceful submission to bondage. They were quiet men, but they did not shrink from agitating against oppression. They showed forbearance, but they knew its limits. They believed in order, but not in the order of tyranny. With them, nothing was settled that was not right. With them, justice, liberty, and humanity were final, not slavery and oppression. You may well cherish the memory of such men. They were great in their day and generation. Their solid manhood stands out more as we contrast with the degenerate times. How circumspect, exact, and proportionate were all their movements. How unlike politicians of an hour. Their statesmen looked beyond the passing moment and stretched away in length into the distant future, fully appreciating the hardship to be against them. Your fathers, the fathers of this republic, laid the cornerstone of the national superstructure, which has risen and still rises in grandeur around you. Of this fundamental work, this day is the anniversary. My business, if I have any here today, is with the present. The accepted time with God, and His cause is the ever-living now. We have to do with the past only as we can make it useful, the present and to the future. Now is the time, the important time. Your fathers have lived, died, and have done their work, and have done much of it well. You live and must die. You must do your work. You have no right to enjoy a child's share in labor of your fathers unless your children are to be blessed by your labors. You have no right to wear out and waste the hard-earned fame of your fathers to cover your indolence. Fellow citizens, pardon me, allow me to ask, why am I called upon to speak here today? What I have, or those I represent, to do with your national independence are great principles of political freedom and of national justice, embodied in the Declaration of Independence extended to us. And am I, therefore, called upon to bring our humble offering to the national altar, and to confess the benefits and express devout gratitude for the blessings resulting from your independence to us.
Would to God, both for your sakes and ours, that an affirmative answer could be truthfully returned to these questions. Then would my task be light and my burden easy and delightful. But such is not the state of the case. I say it with a sad sense of disparity between us. I am not included with the pale of this glorious anniversary, Your high independence only reveals the immeasurable distance between us. The blessings in which you this day rejoice are not enjoyed in common. The rich inheritance of justice, liberty, prosperity, and independence bequeathed by your fathers is shared by you, not by me. The sunlight that brought life and healing to you has brought stripes and death to me. This 4th of July is yours, not mine. You may rejoice, I must mourn to drag a man in fetters into the grand illuminated temple of liberty, and call upon him to join you in joyous anthems where inhuman mockery and sacrilegious irony. Do you mean, citizens, to mock me by asking me to speak today?
Fellow citizens, above your national tumultuous joy, I hear the mournful wail of millions whose chains, heavy and grievous yesterday, are today rendered more intolerable by the jubilee shouts that reach them. My subject, then, fellow citizens, is American slavery. I shall see this day from the slave's point of view. Standing here, identified with the American bondman, make his wrongs mine. I do not hesitate to declare with all my soul that the character and conduct of this nation never looked blacker to me than on this 4th of July. Whether we turn to the declarations of the past or the professions of the present, the conduct of the nation seems equally hideous and revolting. America is false to the past, false to the present, and solemnly blinds herself to be false to the future. Standing with God and the crushed and bleeding slave on this occasion, I will, in the name of humanity which is outraged, in the name of liberty which is fettered, in the name of the Constitution and the Bible, which is disregarded and trampled upon, dare to call in the question and to denounce, with all the emphasis I can command, everything that serves to question and to denounce, perpetuate slavery, the great sin and shame of America. I will not equivocate. I will not excuse. I will use the severest language I can command, and yet not one word shall escape me that any man whose judgment is not blinded by prejudice, who is not in the heart a slaveholder, shall not confess to the right and just. I fancy I hear someone of my audience say it is just in this circumstance that you and your brother abolitionists fail to make a favorable impression on the public mind. Would you argue more and denounce less? Would you persuade more and rebuke less? Your cause would be much more likely to succeed. But I submit, where all is in plain, there is nothing to be argued. What point in the anti-slavery creed would you have me argue? Must I undertake to prove that a slave is a man? The slaveholders themselves acknowledge it in the enactment of laws for their government. They acknowledge it when they punish disobedience on the part of the slave. There are 72 crimes in the state of Virginia which, if committed by a black man, subject him to the punishment of death. Well, only 2 of the same crimes will subject a white man to the like punishment. What is this but the acknowledgement that the slave is a moral, intellectual, and responsible being?
Southern statutes books are covered with enactments forbidding, under severe fines and penalties, the teaching of a slave to read or to write. When you can point to any such laws in reference to the beast of the field, then I may consent to argue the manhood of a slave. When the dogs in your streets, when the fowls of the air, when the cattle on your hills, when the fish of the sea, and the reptiles that crawl, shall be unable to distinguish the slave from a brute, then I may argue with you that the slave is a man. For the present, it is enough to affirm the equal manhood of the Negro. It is not astonishing that while we are plowing, planting, reaping, using all kinds of mechanical tools, erecting houses, constructing bridges, building ships, working in metals of brass, iron, copper, silver, gold, that while we are reading, writing, ciphering, acting as clerks, merchants, secretaries, having among us lawyers, doctors, ministers, poets, authors, editors, orators, and teachers, that while we are engaged in all manners of enterprise common to the other man, digging gold in California, capturing the whale in the Pacific, feeding sheep and cattle on the hillside, moving, acting, thinking, planning, living in families as husbands, wives, and as children, all the above, confessing, worshiping the Christian God, looking, hopefully, for life and mortality beyond the grave, we are called upon to prove that we are men. Would you have me argue that the man is entitled to liberty? That he is the rightful owner of his own body? You have declared it. Must I argue the wrongfulness of slavery? It is to be settled by rules of logic and argumentation as a matter beset with great difficulty, involving doubtful application of principle of justice. Hard to be understood? How should I look today, in the presence of Americans, to show that men have natural right to freedom? To do so would make myself look ridiculous, and to offer an insult to your own understanding. There's not a human beneath the canopy of heaven that does not know that slavery is wrong for a man. What? Am I supposed to argue that it is wrong to make men brutes, to rob them of their liberty, to work them without wages, to keep them ignorant of their relationships to their fellow men, to beat them with sticks, to flay their flesh, to lash their skin, to loo their limbs with iron, to hunt them with dogs, to sell them at auctions, to sunder their families, to knock out their teeth, to burn their flesh, to starve them into obedience and submission to their masters? Must I argue that a system that is marked with blood and stained with pollution is wrong? No, I will not. I have better employments for my time and strength than such arguments would apply. What then remains to be argued? Is it that is slavery not divine? That God did not establish it? That our own doctors of divinity are mistaken? There's blasphemy in the thought that in humanity cannot be divine. Who can reason on such proportion? I cannot. The time for such argument is past.
At a time like this, scorching irony, not convincing argument is needed. Oh, had I the ability and I could reach the nation's ear, I would. I'd pour out a fiery stream of biting ridicule, blasting reproach, withering sarcasm, and stern rebuke. For it is not the light that is needed, but fire. It is not the gentle shower, but thunder. We need the storm, the whirlwind, and the earthquake. The feeling of the nation must be quickened. The consciousness of the nation must be roused. The propriety of the nation must be startled, and the hypocrisy of the nation must be exposed, and its crimes against God and man must be proclaimed and denounced. What to the American slave is your 4th of July? I answer, a day that reveals to him more than all the other days of the year the gross injustice and cruelty to which he is the constant victim. To him your celebration is a sham, your boasted liberty an unholy license, your national greatness swelling vanity. Your sounds of rejoice are empty and heartless, your denunciation of tyrants, brass-fronted impudence, your shouts of liberty and equality, hollow mockery. Your prayers and hymns, your sermons and thanksgivings, with all your religious parade and solemnity are to him mere bombast, fraud, deception, impudity, and hypocrisy. A thin veil to cover up the crimes which would disgrace a nation of savages. There is not a nation on this earth guilty of practices more shocking and bloody than there are these people of the United States. At this very hour, go where you may, search where you will, roam through all the monarchies and despotions of the old world, search out every abuse, and when you have found the last, lay your facts by the side of everyday practices of this nation, and you will say with me, for revolting barbarity and shameless hypocrisy, America reigns without a rival. Take the American slave trade, which is especially preposterous just now and carried on in all large towns and cities in one half of this confederacy. In several states, the trade is the chief source of wealth. It is called the internal slave trade in order to divert it from the horror which the foreign slave trade is contemplated. That trade has long since been denounced by this government as piracy, an execrable traffic. To arrest it, the nation keeps a squadron at immense cost on the coast of Africa. Everywhere in this country, it is safe to speak of this foreign slave trade as the most inhumane traffic, opposed alike to the laws of God and man. It is, however, a notable fact that while so much execration is poured out by the Americans upon those engaged in the foreign slave trade, the men engaged in the slave trade between the states pass without condemnation, and their business is deemed honorable.
Behold the practical operation of this internal slave trade, the American slave trade, sustained by American politics and American religion. Here you see men and women reared like swine for market. You know what is a swine drover? I will show you a man drover. They inhabit all our southern states. They perambulate the country and crowd the highways of the nation with droves of human stock. You will see one of these human flesh jobbers, armed with pistols, whip, and bowie knife, driving a company of 100 men, women, and children from the Potomac to the slave market at New Orleans. These wretched people are to be sold singly or in lots to suit purchasers. They are food for the cotton field and the deadly sugar mill. Mark the sad processes as it moves wearily along, and the inhuman wretch who drives them. Hear his savage yells and bloody chilling oaths as he hurries on his fights captives. There, see the old man with locks thin and gray. Cast one glance, if you please, upon the young mother whose shoulders are bare to the scorching sun, her burning tears falling on the brow of the babe in her arm. See, too, that girl of 13, weeping, yes, weeping as she thinks of her mother from whom she has been torn. The drove moves tardily. Heat and sorrow have nearly consumed their strength. Suddenly you hear a quick snap, like the discharge of a rifle. The feathers clank and chains rattle stimously. Your ears are saluted with a scream that seems to have torn its way to the center of your soul. The crack you heard was the sound of a slave whip. The scream you heard was from the woman you saw with the babe. Her speed had faltered under the weight of her child and her chains. Follow this drove to New Orleans, attended the auction. See men exclaimed like horses. See the forms of women rudely and brutally exposed of shocking gaze of American slave buyers. See this drove sold and separate forever, and never forget the deep, sad sobs that arose from the scattered multitude. Tell me, citizens, where under the sun you can witness a spectacle more fiendish and shocking. Yet this is but a glance at American slave trade, as it exists at this moment in the ruling part of the United States. I was born amid such sights and scenes. To me, American slave trade is a terrible reality. The flesh mongers gather up their victims by dozens and drive them, chained to the General Depot at Baltimore. When a significant number has been collected, a ship is chartered for the purpose of conveying the Forlum crew to Mobile or New Orleans. From the slave prison to the ship, they are usually driven in the darkness of night. In the deep, still darkness of midnight, I have been often aroused by the dead, heavy footsteps, and piteous cries of the chain gangs that passed our doors.
Wow. It really doesn't get any better than that. To hear these powerful young voices read such a powerful from a powerful essay, who would have thought that those words would be so important still today? In 1941, I think, is when we had the 4 freedoms. Unfortunately, there are people that those 4 freedoms don't really pertain to, even here in 2020. I don't have that freedom of fear to know that when my children leave the house, like many black parents, brown parents, people of color, immigrants, to know whether or not that child is going to return safely. We have to teach our young people how to behave, what to do in the event that they are approached by a police officer. You can't imagine what that's like, to have to tell a child, well, you can't be a child. You have to react this way when you come in contact with law enforcement. We're entitled to those 4 freedoms. So today I put out a challenge to everybody here to work very right from in here, where your soul is, right from your heart, and pledge that we're going to change the narrative. We're going to make sure that those 4 freedoms that everyone speaks so proudly about truly do apply to every human being in our country. Thank you.
There was also a 4th of July bicycle parade held that day just before the reading. I left Park Square and headed up North Street, then turned into the West Side neighborhood. It later entered into the Morningside neighborhood, then passed the Common and returned to Park Square for the reading. I hope your holiday was memorable. Until next time, stay safe and stay strong.